very welcome to Gothenburg, Yuri. Nice to have you here.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. The only word I know in Swedish, because I asked my editor, Henrik, is thank you, which is tack. But he told me that there are several words that I can't survive just saying tack a lot. So I'll try to say it a lot. Thank you very much.
My first question is, you're not so well known yet to the Swedish audience. Can you please tell us something about yourself?
Yes, well, I'm from Mexico. I'm from a small town in central Mexico called Actopan. I grew up in the capital of the state of Hidalgo, which is called Pachuca, an old mining town. I then lived in Mexico City for 11 years. I studied political science. After that, I lived in France for a year, in Orléans, which is a very pretty, very boring, pretty conservative city in central France. After that, I went to the most different place that you could imagine. I went to the border between the United States and Mexico. I lived in the border between El Paso and Ciudad Juárez, which is one of the most complex and fascinating places you could visit it in the world. After that, I did a PhD in Berkeley, and I went back to Mexico, and then I went back to the United States, and I'm currently teaching Latin American literature in the University of Tulane in New Orleans.
And so, would you consider yourself American or US or a Mexican?
No, well, I'm not American, and I'm a Mexican citizen. I have lived most of my life in Mexico. I go all the time to Mexico. I don't have, and I will not have, American citizenship. Maybe it would be comfortable for me. Maybe it would be convenient to have the American citizenship, but there is something. I don't know. There's something that really makes me not ever to apply for that. So I will just keep being a Mexican citizen the rest of my life.
And the question about the book Signs. So my question to you is, how did you first time pass the border between Mexico and the United States?
Well, the first time that I went to the United States was when I was 12 years old. An uncle of mine, a brother of my father, used to live in the border between Tamaulipas and Texas in a town that in recent years became really famous because they have found mass graves, and that is called San Fernando. Well, I crossed it with family, you know, and afterwards I have crossed it in different spots of the border, which is one of the longest borders in the world, and sometimes walking, sometimes in a car.
But have you ever, for you, you said that you are a privileged migrant that has the ability to move over the border. Have you ever had any problems crossing the border?
I've had minor problems, but my problems are not comparable to the problems that the thousands of workers or millions of workers have to endure in their everyday life. I have never had to run for my life away from racist people or from racist policemen. I mean, now and then I received snarky comments from immigration officers in the border. Now and then they harass me a little bit, but that is nothing in comparison with what the people that have no documents have to endure. That is an everyday drama that workers from everywhere have to suffer when they encounter the authorities. You know?
Mm. 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 Mm tecken som föregår jordens undergång. And this is the book that we are going to talk a little bit about now. And in English, it's called Signs Preceding the End of the World. And I think I really, in one way, fell in love with the character Makina, who is the main character of that book. She's the switchboard operator for the local telephone, and she's on a quest, searching for her lost brother who has traveled to USA. On her journey, she meets many vibrant and intriguing characters. So can you please tell us a little bit about Makina and her journey? Who is she?
Yeah, Signs Preceding the End of the World is the story of this character, Makina, who is a woman that is looking for her brother. She lives in a small town, and she is from her small town a very cosmopolitan person, because she speaks the language, the original language from the town. She speaks the language, like the lingua franca of the country, which my model would be the Spanish language. And she speaks also the language of the people that have migrated to the other side. This other side that is unnamed in the book, but for which I use the United States as a model. So she receives I mean, one day her mother asks her to go and look for her brother, because the brother is a man who has traveled to the other side to reclaim some land. So in this, so she does that. So she has to go all the way through her country. She has to jump to the other side, and in this voyage, she's gonna discover a lot of things about herself, about her country, about the other country, about the languages of one place and the other place, and how all these things are constantly changing: the languages, the countries, and her own identity. So for me, it is a tale of survival, it is a tale of self-discovery, and it's also a tale of strength. And since I decided that I was going to tell this story, from the very first moment, I knew that the character had to be a woman. I am convinced that in every aspect of life, the world makes things more difficult for women, in pretty much in every aspect of life. But it's more difficult for women traveling by themselves, for women migrating by themselves. It can be hell for some of these women. So I knew that my character was going to be a character that is really strong and really wise. And for me, it had to be like the most powerful character in that sense. And I have met women like this that really have to develop the skills to survive in a cruel environment. And I also had the privilege of growing up surrounded by strong women. Like my grandmother was a nurse, and she worked in a union, and she was a single mother. So anyway, it's just part of what made me choose this kind of character.
And she's making encounters by gangsters who helps her to cross the border. She's even assisted by different persons. She's moving into the United States on the quest for her brother. She is the main character, and she's a wonderful and vibrant character. But the other persons that she's meet, they are not so. They are more like described by their role than a really complex person. Or do you agree with me?
Yeah. Well, the thing is that she has to. This is a character with a lot of emotional intelligence. She has to deal sometimes with people that are being violent, sometimes with people that are being secretive, sometimes with people that really don't know how to behave in front of her. So this is for me one of the most important things about this character, that at every step of the way she has to develop new skills, not only to survive, but to be fair to the people that she's encountering, because this is a character with a big ethical stance, and she wants to be fair, and she wants to behave in a way in which she could be proud of herself. So in that way, even though she encounters some mean, obscure characters, she always has the generosity of trying to understand them. You know.
Thank you very much. The book, I would like you to read a part of the book, and you will read it in Spanish. I will later on read it in Swedish, so you know.
Do you want me just when she starts reading the thing, or right before that?
The sentence that starts with Makina.
Okay.
From that and to her.
Okay. So this part is about a moment when she's already on the other side, and she sees a group of people that look like her in a way. She suspects that they come from the same place where she's coming from, and they are kneeling in front of a policeman. The policeman is arresting them, and pretty much he is exerting some violence on them. So one of the policeman sees that one of the men has a book there. And he says, "Oh, so you are a poet. So now you have to explain me what you are doing here if you are such a good writer." But the man is so nervous that he fails to do that, and because he's just like trembling. So Makina jumps in, and she gets the piece of paper, and she starts writing. So I'm just gonna read this passage from where she gets it until the end of the...
Yes.
Okay. Makina le arrebató súbitamente el lápiz y el libro. El policía gritó: "A ti no te dije que..." Pero se calló al ver que Makina comenzó a escribir sin titubeos. La vigiló mientras lo hacía, todo el tiempo sonriendo sardónicamente, aunque no podía ocultar desconcierto. Makina escribió sin detenerse a pensar cuál palabra era mejor que otra o cómo sonaba el mensaje. Escribió 10 líneas y al terminar colocó el lápiz sobre el libro y en él detuvo su mirada. El policía aguardó unos segundos. Luego dijo: "Dame eso". Cogió la hoja y comenzó a leer en voz alta. Nosotros somos los culpables de esta destrucción, los que no hablamos su lengua ni sabemos estar en silencio, los que no llegamos en barco, los que ensuciamos de polvo sus portales, los que rompemos sus alambradas, los que venimos a quitarles el trabajo, los que aspiramos a limpiar su mierda, los que anhelamos trabajar a deshoras, los que llenamos de olor a comida sus calles tan limpias, los que les trajimos violencia que no conocían, los que transportamos sus remedios, los que merecemos ser amarrados del cuello y de los pies, nosotros, a los que no nos importa morir por ustedes. ¿Cómo podía ser de otro modo? Los que quién sabe qué aguardamos, nosotros los oscuros, los chaparros, los grasientos, los mustios, los obesos, los anémicos, nosotros los bárbaros.
Thank you very much. Jag kommer att läsa från sidan 109 i den svenska översättningen. Boken, vill jag bara säga, översatt fantastiskt väl av Maria Cederroth. Väldigt bra översättning. Då slet Makina åt sig boken och pennan. Polisen skrek: "Jag har inte sagt åt dig att..." Men han tystnade när han såg att Makina började skriva utan att tveka. Han bevakade henne medan hon höll på och log hela tiden hånfullt, även om han inte helt kunde dölja sin förvirring. Makina skrev utan att göra uppehåll för att fundera över vilka ord som passade bäst eller över hur meddelandet kunde tänkas låta. Hon skrev 10 rader och när han var färdig la hon pennan på boken och fäste blicken där. Polisen avvaktade några sekunder. Sedan sa han: "Ge mig det där." tog pappret och började läsa högt. Vi är det skyldiga till all denna förödelse. Vi som inte talar ert språk, men ändå inte kan hålla tyst. Vi som inte kom hit med båt. Vi som drar in smuts i era trappuppgångar. Vi som har sönder era stängsel. Vi som kommer för att ta era arbeten. Vi som bara strävar efter att torka upp er skit. Vi som längtar efter att få arbeta dygnets alla timmar. Vi som sprider vårt matos över era skinande renade gator. Vi som tog hit ett våld som ni aldrig mötts förut. Vi som levererar era droger. Vi som förtjänar halsjärn och fotbojor. Vi som gärna dör för er skull. Vad annars skulle vi göra? Vi som går och väntar på Gud vet vad. Vi de mörka, kortvuxna, flottiga. Vi lömska, feta, blodlösa. Vi barbarerna. So, this is Makina's statement. What do you think what does she mean by writing this?
She is aware that the person in front of her needs her the same way he needs all the other people that are kneeling before him, but that person also needs to believe that he has defeated them. And so she is taking to an extreme the discourse that he wants to listen, and at the same time turning that speech into a form of resistance. But it's so evident that at the same time the policeman can't reply to that. So it's a form of resistance that consists in just repeating what the oppressor is saying and showing how absurd it can be, showing how irrational it can be. So that I would say that is. But also I just want to say something that I know that you already mentioned, but I wanted to thank publicly. This is the first time that I have the opportunity to thank publicly to the translator, because I was in touch with Maria when she was translating it, and I think that we should recognize a lot more the work of the translators. It's a really hard work. It's and usually they are not. This work is not acknowledged, and I'm really happy to be working with Nilsson. That it's one of those publishers that really acknowledge how hard it is to translate and how important it is for a literary field. You know.
I very much do agree, and really to the small-scale publishers that is doing an incredible work translating the world literature into the quite complicated language of Swedish. What does happen is just after this scene with the police. Is Makina arrested, or are the person standing in front of them freed?
Well, eventually he is taken out of balance, so he just leaves, and they go, you know. And she keeps on going, and until, well, but I don't want to say it till the end of the novel. But part of what happens, it's something that recreates her own identity, that she finds a new way of being in this place, a new way of seeing herself, you know.
And would you say that will she ever return? Because in the book you really don't know. Or will she ever be caught in some kind of situation, hybridity or creolity, or will she ever return the same?
Well, I have to say a couple of things. One is that I really don't know, and I like not knowing, because, you know, at some point when you're writing, you like that your characters in some way are just offering you a part of their story, and you can kind of think that you know what is gonna happen, but when the character has its own engine and has its own logic, I like that you are not determining the whole thing. But now, thinking about the kind of character that is Makina, which is a cosmopolitan character, it's a character that knows how to be in different places, know how to exist in different languages. I like to think that she would be able to go back and forth. And, you know, this is one of the reasons why in Mexico we are using more and more the word migrant and not immigrant or emigrant, because the word migrant describes not a travel in one direction, but a phenomenon that is happening in both ways. And this is something that characterizes not only the migration phenomenon between Mexico and the United States, but I think in a lot of places that people come and go and don't just abandon their place once and for all. And I would say that this is part of the logic of the title, Science Preceding the End of the World, because for a lot of people that have to abandon their land, it feels, abandoning their family, abandoning their language, it feels a sort of end of the world. So it's a reflection on that, on how you can resist that, how you can nuance it, how you don't have to accept it as a sort of curse, you know.
So creolity or hybridity is the new black?
I guess so, yeah. I think it has always been like that, but we are just realizing it.
Do agree. 2017, so to say, you can talk about this part of the universe without mentioning a guy who wants to erect a wall. According to me, this won't solve anything, just another obstacle. Both the goods and the people who wants to pass will do it anyway. Do you agree?
Yes, I mean, migration has been happening in the world since the human beings existed. There is not one single people in the world that has been there since the beginning, if we can even speak about a sort of beginning. You know, people migrate, people move, people travel. It doesn't matter how difficult it is. And we have seen it in every single border. It doesn't matter how violent it is. It doesn't matter how cruel it is. And we are seeing it in Europe now. Even with all the terrible things that have been happening to the Syrian refugees, they keep moving around. And sometimes because they need, sometimes because they want, sometimes because they have no other option. But people are keep going to do it. And this applies to any kind of border. But if you see specifically the border between Mexico and the United States, it's huge. It's really impossible to put a fence in there. And also, there is already a fence in most of it, and it's not stopping anything. People will jump it, people will go under it, people will go around it, and it's the way, and it's the way it has always been happening. And I would add something else. You were saying that the good and the bad. Many times, the bad people that come into your country come with passports and with a lot of money and with a lot of and with all the documents. You know, it's not the documents what says that you're a good or a bad person. It's something else. And I would say that some of the best people in the United States are the people that come without documents, that are doing really hard work for really lousy salaries, and that have to endure the harassment of the police and of some racist groups. So I think that documents don't qualify you as a good or a bad person. It just says how you are gonna endure certain difficulties in your country of choice. You know?
Thank you very much. I think you are telling very important, and you're really I really much do agree what you are saying. I think it's time to leave Machina and the science, maybe moving to your other books. So in some kind of interregnum. So I would say, you would say that which writers influence you the most, or can you say another contemporary Mexican writer that you want to tell this audience about?
Well, we can spend a lot of time talking about this because this is something that changes with time. For a long time, the American noir writers were really important to me. Also, the Spanish medieval literature is really important to me. And now and then, I find specific works from which I try to learn. There is this, for instance, this Catalan writer called Mercè Rodoreda, that if it's not translated into Swedish, I hope someone will translate it, called La Plaza del Diamante, which is a story of this woman during the Civil War in Spain and the years after the Civil War. And it's a book where there is a lot of suffering and a lot of violence, but you never hear one single shot. You don't see one single gun. So this writer, Mercè Rodoreda, has the power to express all the suffering of war without using the pornography of violence, which is a way in which I refer to how sometimes we talk about victims and we talk about suffering without respect for the victims. And this is a book with a lot of respect for the people who are suffering the violence. So this is one of them. And just let me mention another writer that I like a lot, the French writer Boris Vian, that he used to write two kinds of novels. On one hand, these strange noir, really hard novels, and then this kind of fantastic novels in which he would literalize some metaphors. For instance, he has a short story in which there is a character who has a sort of gun with which he would tear out your heart. And because if you are in love and you're saying like, oh, you're taking my heart apart, he would literally do that. The character would literally come and take your heart. And so this is a writer that I like because he's like a really free kind of author. He does whatever he wants with language. He does whatever he wants with literature. And this is a thing that I have always wanted to learn, how you can just make your own language, how you can build your own reality through literature, Me myself is more into Mexican cinema than Mexican contemporary. So when I was reading your books, I saw some signs of a couple of my favorite Mexican directors. Alejandro González Iñárritu, who has made foremost Amores Perros, and another movie called Babel, another one called 21 Grams. And maybe also Guillermo del Toro, who's made the movie Pan's Labyrinth. Would you say that you are influenced by contemporary Mexican cinema, or do you feel, or are you more like you're a little bit more to the same generation of Mexican, or do you have the same influences? Well, these three directors are a little bit older than me. My first novel, I published it when already a couple of these movies have been, before a couple of these movies have been produced. But I would say that we maybe share some of the same influences. I was talking about the American noir movies. I think that would be one of them. But also, I think that maybe we could share some of the same concerns about social issues in Mexico and how to express this through art, you know. And this has to do with an ongoing discussion in Mexico, which is how do we talk about violence? How do we talk about some of the most pressing and difficult issues in our society? And there's some people who say that you shouldn't aestheticize violence, but reality has always been aestheticized. When people tell me, like, oh, how can Mexican writers or Mexican cinematographers speak about violence, I tell them, you know, there's this story, this old story about a guy who has sex with his mother, he kills his father, and he takes his eyes out of him, and it's Oedipus, and it's one of the monuments of Western culture, you know, and it sounds like a Mexican history story nowadays. So violence has always been in the core of art, and I think that maybe I share some concerns with these filmmakers that you had mentioned. You know?
And this leads you to kropparnas själavandring, or in English, the transmigration of bodies. That is, in a way, a little bit even more. For me, it's like a perfect movie script, or a story with most like a comic novel, and this is another kind of story, like a pure Mexican story. Can you please tell me a little bit about this book?
Yeah, this is the story, to say it in one line, this is a story of a guy who wants to stay inside but has to go outside. He wants to stay inside for two reasons. One, because there is a girl in the building where he lives with whom he finally has the opportunity to get laid. And he also wants to stay inside because outside there is something horrible happening. There is an epidemic, so there is people dying, and there's a lot of fear, and the authorities are going crazy with this. But he has to go outside because he has a job. And this character is the kind of guy that is, he's like a problem solver. He solves he solves like obscure problems that normal people have. So that some guy asked him to do this specific thing. He has to exchange a body that has ended up with the wrong family. So this was a topic that has been interesting me for years now. I have always thought that literature speaks about critical moments. Sometimes these critical moments are just moments of silence. Sometimes it's just a moment of falling in love. Sometimes it's a moment of violence. What defines a character is not his weight or his age, but how this character reacts in the face of emergency, how this character reacts in the face of an extreme situation. And I have been wanting to write a novel that happened during an epidemic. And I was already preparing this novel when, I don't know if you all remember, there was this big scare of the swine flu in Mexico City. And I was in Mexico City during this time. And it was scary. It was, well, a tragedy for the people that died, for their families, for the people that lost their jobs. But it was also really fascinating to be in the biggest city in the world and to see no one in the streets. It was really interesting to go out in the streets and to see the few people that were out, they were wearing masks. And more than that, the whole vibe in the streets, the whole fear that you could feel, you know. And It's the kind of image that you have seen many times in science fiction movies, but to be there actually living that, it was a really interesting thing for me. So I already had the story, but this gave me all this material, all this texture to finish the story the way I wanted to.
But I'm almost not believing you. But would you say that the swine flu caused this emergency or lockdown in Mexico City?
I just have to say that I have pictures in my Facebook of these days wearing the mask and with people in the subway wearing masks and yes, just so that you believe me.
Yeah.
No, but I understand that the direction of your question. The thing is this: the epidemics is the trigger for this. But of course, I'm not talking only about the epidemics. I'm talking about a society in which you stopped trusting your neighbor, in which you don't trust your government anymore, in which you fear your neighbor, in which you fear the authorities. And this is something that has been happening, well, in a lot of places, but certainly in Mexico, in the last decade at least, in which fear has become part of our normal life, in which distrust towards the government has become just the state of affairs. So yes, I'm talking about the epidemics, but I'm talking also about something deeper. They're happening within society and happening in the way we relate to institutions and to with each other. You know.
And the main character of this book, Transmigration, he's in Swedish called Budbäraren, in English the Redeemer, and we was talking about this beforehand, in Spanish the Alfaqueque. Can you please explain what the Alfaqueque is and the meaning of the word?
Well, I have to say something about the way I understand writing. I think that we should consider as our sources, our linguistic sources, any kind of linguistic material that is out there. And this means what we read in Twitter and what we hear on the streets and what we hear in a bar and the language that you inherit from your family, and also really old language that has been forgotten but that somehow is still speaking to us and somehow is still saying something about our reality. And one of the things that I like is to go back to medieval literature. So there is this series of books in medieval Spain called Las Siete Partidas, which are 7 books of law written by Alfonso X. Well, not actually by him, but his workshop. He had a lot of lawyers and wise people working with him. And they wrote these books. They were supposed to be the new laws in Spain, and actually they were never applied in Spain. But it's a really interesting reading. There is this specific passage in which he describes the duties, the work of a specific character that was very important, because you have to remember this is a moment in which there is a confrontation between the Christians and the Muslims, and the Christians are pushing the Muslims out of the peninsula, and well, this took 8 centuries, so it was a really long war that transformed both peoples, that transformed their identities. There was a lot of exchange. It was not just an armed confrontation. There was a lot of interaction. So there's this passage in which they describe the duties of a guy in charge of exchanging prisoners with the Muslims, and the name of this guy was Alfaqueque, and this is a really crucial character in any conflict. the guy who works as a communication vessel with your antagonist, with your enemy, the guy who has to look at your enemy with different eyes. And when I remember reading this, and I said, this is the kind of character that is really needed nowadays. So when I realized it, I said, I should use some character like this in my novel. And I said, I'm just gonna call him like that. I'm just gonna use this same word that is speaking to us, is saying something about our reality nowadays. You know?
And this is one way of describing, or an extremely interesting way of describing this really well-written and interesting book, Kropparnas själavandring. The Alpha Keke, or the Redeemer in the middle, and his role in a city full of fear. I think we are approaching 7 o'clock now, and I think we're supposed to end round about 7 o'clock, but before that I think we should have a couple of questions or comments from you in the audience. So will Malin please stand up, so if you have something to say, wave, and Malin will come with the microphone.
I would like to ask something about the last book you talked about. I just read it, very good. And it's interesting how the authorities, they are very present in the case of the illness, of the flu, but the authorities are not in any way involved in the violence here. So somehow there seems to be like this violent world where the situation sort of causes violence, and then this violence is explained in different ways. And what this middleman does is that he somehow makes up rules for this situation, so that everybody with a straight back can walk out of there. We followed the rules, and so, but no authorities are involved in that situation. I don't know how. How you think about
first of all, thank you for reading the book. The thing is, the government is, the institutions are present all the time, even though they are ineffective, even though they are not efficient. They are present in the sense that they are administering this violent normality, this violent normalcy. And they are part of the fear that is happening there. You know, the thing is that they appear in certain moments. I don't know if you remember this scene where they are just stopping a guy who looks suspicious, but they are actually
some kind of the punk rocker scene. The punk rocker. Is it the scene with the punk rocker?
Oh yeah, that's it. Yeah, in that moment. So the institutions and the government in this environment, their priority is not to solve problems, but to assert their power. You know, and since they are not solving problems, the people have to make up their own rules and have to find their own solutions. So this is a guy who is very aware of that, who knows the institutions, who knows the way in which the government works. And he has this double task that on one hand, he has to solve some problems, and on the other hand, he has to preserve some part of himself. Because he has, even though he's like this kind of delinquent character, at the same time, he has some ethical rules from himself. So the government is absent not only in the sense that it's not solving problems, it's absent also in an ethical way. So this is a responsibility of this individual somehow to fill that void, you know. So I don't know if I'm talking a little bit what you're saying, but thank you for reading it.
Can I ask you elaborate? Would you consider this as a description of the Mexican society of today?
Well, it's part of it. I mean, it's what we see in big parts of the Mexican territory now. It's an absence of the state, and this is one of the reasons why organized crime has earned, in certain moments, legitimacy within certain parts of the population, because the state is just not doing their job. And sometimes you have these charismatic figures that appear to be solving problems, you know. And more than that, when you have no functioning institutions, people have to start finding ways and creating ways, sometimes illegal ways, to go on with their lives. So yeah, in Mexico, among many other problems, there is a total impunity. There is pretty much no rule of law, for at least for the people with no power, you know, because of course, as in many other places, you have the powerful, for which the institutions do work well, you know.
Some other comments or questions, please? Up there.
Hi. Would you consider to write another book on migration situations?
Maybe, but you know, this is the thing. One of the things that I do when I'm preparing a book is I prepare lists of words that I like how they sound, that I like what they suggest, and I also do a list of words that I'm not going to use. So in this book, In Science Preceding the End of the World, if there is one word that I never use, it's migration or immigration, because, you know, these are words that are so codified by the media that you hear it and you stop paying attention to the complexity of the phenomenon. So this is something that is gonna be important for me in the future, the way it is important for me right now. So I think I will keep writing about it, even though maybe not in those terms. Right now, I was telling Henrik, my publisher, I have been writing a series of short stories loosely related to the science fiction genre, and a lot of these characters in these stories are moving from one world to another. So in a way, I'm still concerned with the idea of how you leave one place, how you adapt to another place, how this transforms your identity, and what the space in between these two places sometimes is the most important of them. So I guess I will keep writing about it, even though I will try to find new ways to approach the issue. You know?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And really interesting answer that you do a do list and not to do with the words. Really inspiring. Any other comments? Yep, we have one there, up there.
Hi. Since your society is so violent, is it possible for a Mexican writer today not to write about violence?
Well, there's a lot of things that I could say about this. The first thing that I would say, and this is really important for me to point this out, is that all this violence is not a Mexican violence. What we have is Mexican victims of a global issue. You know, this problem, the whole phenomenon of organized crime, is something that is not happening just in Mexico. It's happening in New York, in Paris, in Zurich, in London, where they launder all this money, where they do all these deals. You know, I have to always insist. Most of the money comes from the United States. Most of the arms come from the United States. Most of the demand for the drugs come from the United States. Then why do people call this the Mexican problem? It's the Mexican victims of a global problem. And there are a lot of evidence of how especially British banks are laundering the money. So this is, it's not that Mexican society is violent, it's that Mexican society has a lot of victims of a violent global problem. And the thing is, of course, there's a lot of people writing about things that are not, and that they are not addressing directly the issue. And I think that this is very important because if we only talk about one aspect of society, we end up with what I have been calling the pornography of violence, just talking about the blood and just talking about the shootings, when there are a lot of things happening at the same time. And it's always going to be in the back of these stories. The violence is always in the context, you know, even when you are not when you're not speaking openly about it. But yeah, I would say that there's a lot of very interesting things happening in Mexican literature. There's a lot of fantastic literature. There's a lot of science fiction. And so it's very diverse, and there's a lot of people speaking openly, explicitly about violence, but I wouldn't say that this is the one thing that defines our literary field. But no, thank you for allowing me to say this, because this is like a very important topic.
You also said that you were living in the city of New Orleans, and you said that it's one of the most violent places that you ever had encounter.
Yes.
Can you please elaborate? Because I thought what you were saying to me before was very interesting.
Yeah, well, I live in New Orleans, which I think is one of the most interesting cities in the world. It's an uncommon city. It's a really singular place, not only within the United States, but in a global perspective. It has very interesting migration patterns that are different from other places in the United States. Migration from Haiti, migration from Honduras, migration from the Cajuns, which is a really strange migration pattern of people coming from Holland, then to Canada, then to Kansas, and they ended up in Louisiana, of all places, and then they mixed with the Creoles coming from Haiti. So New Orleans, unlike the rest of the United States, created their own gastronomy, their own music, their own linguistic flavor. So it's a place really complex, really creative, but at the same time with a terrible history of structural racism and with terrible levels of violence. I was talking about this with Henrik, and he asked me, these levels of violence are high even for American standards, and I told him they are high even for Mexican standards. You know, the number of assassinations in New Orleans is close to the number of assassinations in Ciudad Juárez nowadays in Mexico. People don't talk about that because I think there is some unconscious racism in a lot of the media that says it's just black people killing black people, and this is something that it's not discussed a lot, you know, and it's a demographic tragedy. Most of the dead people in New Orleans, most of the people that died violently in New Orleans are kids between 15 and 20 years old, mostly black. And the extraordinary thing is this: it's that it's a very gentle city. If you walk around the streets, New Orleans is one of those cities in which everyone is saying hi to you on the streets, in which you can talk to strangers really easily in the streets, and it's a city created around the idea of partying, you know. So maybe it's a way of surviving all these conflicts. Maybe it's a way of overcoming all this violence. So you have this combination of a lot of love for life and a lot of violence. So it's really interesting. It's and I think it expresses a lot of the conflicts that are still there entrenched in the American society.
Thank you very much. I think we should end this conversation here. Yuri, you will be here and you will be able to buy the books, and I hope you will be able to sign them for the book buyers here tonight.
Yes.
So you will be here and also staying here if some of you want to ask some more specific questions. For me, this conversation is all about for me, the idea of what Internationell författarscen is. To have a really interesting and a good writer coming here. And I have learned a lot from you, both you as a writer, but also the topics you write about. So it has been a pleasure of having you here in Gothenburg.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yuri.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Tack.